How to catch so many trout, you question the meaning of fishing. So quick intro here. My name's Nick. I've caught 176 trout in 19 total fishing trips. So that averages out to about 9 trout, which is pretty darn good. I've basically been fishing my entire life. You can see that's me when I think I was 3 in this picture. I'm now 19 and this is what I love to do. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do it because I don't want you to have to figure it out the hard way, spending money, buying useless stuff. So why should you listen to me? Well, the simple answer is I catch fish and you might not, so you may want to listen. That's pretty much it. This isn't going to be some hyper stimulation, hyper edited video, no music, no nothing, just pure raw information of every single thing I know about trout fishing. And I also don't show up to the river to smell the roses and look at the birds. I just show up to catch as many fish as possible. And that right there is that was an 18-inch rainbow. That's a pretty good one. So 3 steps. The first one is prep. This is basically everything you do before you go out to the river. So we'll cover gear, research, waders, whatever you need is gonna be in the prep. The next thing is the spot. So we're gonna talk about everything you need to look for when picking the right spot. And this will help you maximize the amount of trout you catch. And then lastly, we'll go over what you need to do to actually catch a trout. So step 1, the prep. Research. I know this sounds stupid, but it's actually pretty important. What I want you to do is go into Google and type in your state and trout stocking allocations or website or something along the lines of that. If your state has a stocking program, they should have a website that gives all the information about everything. So you can look up exact spots where they throw fish in, parking spots, how many fish they put in, what date they put them in. So it's really helpful. It literally takes like 2 minutes before you go out, and you can see this is kind of what it should look like right here. It should just be a nice big chart with all the different bodies of water. Some states have maps and stuff. You can actually click on a specific river, which is pretty cool. The next, probably one of the most important things is the rod that you choose for trout fishing. So if you didn't know, trout have super soft mouths. They also like to thrash around a ton when they get hooked. And this causes their mouths to rip super easily. So one way to get around this is to use an ultralight setup. An ultralight rod is basically the lightest and most bendiest rod. So you'll see here I just can bend the tip like full 180, and this will help absorb all that thrashing and jumping that the trout do, and it should help keep the fish on for longer. If you use a stiffer rod, you'll probably notice that you rip more hooks out of more fish. And the best part is that the ultralight rod is just super fun. You feel everything that the trout does, all the jumps, all the thrashing. This specific rod right here is a 5-foot ultralight ugly stick GX2. It's been amazing. You can get this at Walmart, and I'll also leave it linked below on my Amazon links. For whatever reason, it comes in a 2-piece, so you could actually just throw it in your backpack, which is super nice. Now the next thing is a reel. This one's not nearly as important as the rod, but I use a super small reel to go with this rod. I'm not going to get into all the details like the bearings and all that we don't need all that. Just choose a very small reel with low drag, because you don't want to overpower any fish or else you'll start ripping hooks out of their mouths. So this one right here is a Shimano Sienna size 500. It's been great. I've abused the heck out of it. Basically, the most important thing that you want to put most of your money into is your rod, because the rod is basically doing most of the work. Line is also pretty important. I use something called copolymer line, which is pretty good. This one right here, this exact one. You can either use 4 or 6 pound test, and this stuff is pretty strong. I've actually gotten snagged on rocks before, pulled super hard, and the hooks actually bent before the line broke, which is that says something. But as long as you're not using braid, you could basically use whatever other line you want. The reason I stay away from braid is because trout can actually see it in the water more than the other lines. And if you do use braid, just use a long leader, because this will help the trout not see your line. Okay, so there's 4 rigs and lures that I've used to catch all these trout. These will cover any type of water you fish, whether it be a river, creek, pond, lake, anything. And the first one is the power bait drift rig. This is probably my favorite one to fish. It's just so much fun. All you're gonna need is a size 8 bait holder hook, a split shot, and power bait eggs, not the Play-Doh stuff, eggs. All you're gonna do is tie your hook right onto your line, and then about a foot up, you're gonna put a split shot on. And always get an assorted pack of split shots, because you never know what weight you're actually gonna need. The river's always changing, so one day it could be super fast, and the other day it could be super slow, super shallow, super deep. So you always wanna have light split shots and heavy split shots. Put that split shot a foot up above the hook, and then slide on 2 of these little power bait eggs, and you're good to go. This drift rig should only really be used in moving water, so creeks and rivers. The next rig is the power bait bottom rig, and this should really only be used in ponds and lakes. Essentially what's going to happen is the power bait's going to float up about a foot or two off the bottom because it floats. So what you need for this is an egg sinker, a barrel swivel, a size 8 bait holder hook, or a treble hook. And then you just need some kind of a leader material, so you could use monofilament. It should be just fine. I'm using braid for all of these just because it shows up better on camera. And so the first thing you want to do is put that egg sinker on your main line, and then right after that tie the barrel swivel to your main line, and this barrel swivel kind of prevents the egg sinker from sliding off the main line. Next you want to tie your leader to the barrel swivel, and then on the other end of your leader tie the bait holder hook. So the egg sinker should be able to slide freely, and then you have about a foot or two of leader after that. And then again, you could just use power bait eggs. If you're using a treble hook, you can actually go ahead and use the Play-Doh stuff, roll it into a ball, and then put it on the hook. They both work great. I just tend to stay away from the Play-Doh in the river because it comes off super easily. The next two are going to be lures. So the spinner is like a classic. It's one of my favorite lures to fish for trout. All you do is just tie it right onto your main line. It's literally that simple. I usually use gold and silver. They work just fine. I don't really mess with all the other colors. As long as it's shiny, you should have no problem. And then the pink trout worm is also another really good one. You can use it anywhere, but I only really tend to use it in small creeks. The reason for this is because I use a really light jig head. A 1/16 ounce jig head works just fine. You will be limited on casting distance when you fish it like this, but it's absolutely deadly in the little creeks. All you do is tie the jig head to your main line and then slide the worm up the shaft of the jig head and then poke it through and slide it up towards the actual weight of the jig head. Everything should be one streamlined thing like that. You should have the little tail sticking off the end that shakes around and jiggles a bunch. That's kind of what triggers the trout to bite. The next thing, really important thing, is waders. Trout stocked rivers and creeks are really cold early in the spring because, you know, over the winter that water really gets cold. Waders are going to help keep you dry and warm unless I personally don't really care about brand that much because no matter what, if you fish hard enough, they're always going to get holes in them after a couple seasons unless you really try and take care of them. I personally didn't, so it is what it is. A couple of really good brands to use are Frog Togs, Sims. I have Field and Stream waders. You can really go with anything. I wouldn't recommend blowing the bank on them though because they're obviously, like I said, they're gonna get holes. So just save some money and go spend it on some other fishing gear. But really, you should have a pair of waders if you want to get into trout fishing. Another thing that I've really been working on is my organization. You'd be surprised by how much time you save. Having everything in spots where you know it is, not having to search for stuff, not losing stuff, it saves a lot of time. So what I do is I have two little tackle boxes that fit right in my waders, which is pretty cool. One has all my spinners and lures in it, and then the other one has stuff like terminal tackle, split shots, hooks, everything like that. And I also just keep some basic tools like a knife and pliers in my waders. And after every trip, just keep inventory of what you have because you don't want to go out there and then realize you only have one spinner left because then you're not going to catch anything. Okay, so net. You may want to get a trout net. I can't really say a lot about this because I really don't use one, and there's a reason for that. So mine got stolen about probably a month and a half ago. It was definitely my fault. I left it on the bank of a creek, came back at like a half hour later, and it was gone. Now I just have to bare hand the trout, but I always wet my hands before I touch them because they have this little slime coating on them that protects them. And if it comes off, they're probably gonna die. So it would be smart to get a net, specifically a rubber net, a rubber mesh net. You don't want like the string kind because that can really damage the fish. But if you don't have a net, just use your hands and wet them before you touch them. All right, step 2, the spot. So knowing what to look for when you show up to the river is really important. Trout tend to stay in certain places, and what I've noticed after like this month and a half of fishing and 176 trout later, I've noticed that deeper water before and after current is usually the best spot to fish. In the early season, you can kind of just target a lot more places because trout will just be all over the place. The water's still cold. They don't have to go seek out colder water. So you can kind of get away with fishing most places. But later on in the season, like May and June, things really warm up. That water gets warm. And from what I found, the spots that I fished earlier in the spring aren't really producing as many fish. So I tend to only target spots where, you know, there's deep water, there's current. Shade is also important later on in the summer months. Once you start exploring your river, you'll notice that, okay, this spot has fish, this spot doesn't, so I'm not gonna go fish that spot that doesn't. So you'll actually end up saving even more time. Now, stocking bridges can be super valuable. Where I live, the trout are just thrown off the bridges into the river, and a lot of places do this. Now there are a few that send dudes out with like it's called float stocking, and they'll just kind of walk the river and chuck a few fish here, a few fish there. But most places aren't like that. So you can always target the holes and pools near the stocking areas. And freshly stocked trout usually won't move super far from where they were actually tossed in. It's always good to just try these stocking bridges and stocking areas. But be aware there will be a lot of guys there. Okay, so this one's a little weird, but old men. What do they have to do with finding a fishing spot? Kind of a lot, honestly. So I'm pretty young and I'm pretty capable of doing physical stuff, so I use this to my advantage. What I tend to do is I'll see a bunch of people at a spot and I'll just go hike like, I don't know, 500 feet up or downstream from there, and you'll be surprised by how many good spots you find that not a lot of people are fishing. A lot of older guys can't make it to these spots, so while they go pound the main spots, you can go to the smaller little spots up and down the stream, and there still will be fish there. If you're a younger angler, definitely take advantage of this. Older guys will always outfish us, so this is literally the one advantage we have over them. Okay, so go a day after they restock. So where I live, they restock the river every week for the next like 6 weeks after opening day. But they actually close the river for the day when they restock. And it only opens up at like 5 or whatever. So a bunch of dudes will go wait until 5, and then once 5 hits, they'll all just hop in the water and start casting. I've showed up and done this before, and it's not very fun. I've also noticed that I didn't really catch many trout, but when I waited a day, so the next day, and when I went out, I actually did pretty good. But you may want to actually wait, and there's still going to be plenty of fish, trust me. A lot of these dudes don't actually really know what they're doing, so there's still going to be a ton of fish around. So this is a really important one that'll save you a ton of time. The 3 casts rule, or at least it's a rule that I have. So if you take 2, 3, 4 casts at a spot and don't get any bites, either switch lures or just move entirely. From what I've noticed, a trout would have bit on the first or second cast, and if you don't get that bite, that means they don't want what you got on, or they're just not there. And I'll always see people just sit in the same spot for like an hour. It makes no sense. What's the quote? It's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something else or whatever. That's basically what I see on the river every single time I go out. So don't be dumb if you don't get a bite within 2, 3 casts. Switch up or just move. So now we get to step 3, the catch. So when you cast at a river specifically, or a creek, you don't really want to cast upstream because you're going to lose connection with whatever you threw. So if you're using a spinner, it's just going to kind of float down to the bottom while you have slack in your line, so it's not going to be getting the good action you want, and you're definitely going to get snagged because, again, you're just floating right down to the bottom. So what I recommend is cast right in front of you, like directly straight across from you, and you'll get a consistent action the entire cast because you're in the current and you'll have no problems. You still probably will get snagged because you're river fishing and there's rocks. Okay, so we're gonna go over the retrieve for all the baits I showed before. The most important part of fishing any lure, honestly, is making sure it's in the zone where the fish are gonna bite. And I've kind of noticed that that spot is right near the bottom, the middle or the bottom, I would say. So when you're fishing the spinner, you can actually keep your rod tip lower to the bottom and reel in slower. That'll help keep it more close to the bottom. But you don't want to go too slow with the spinner because if you go too slow, it could actually stop spinning. So just make sure your spinner is always spinning, and you'll usually feel the vibration of the spinner on the rod tip. If it's not spinning, you're just going to be reeling in with little to no tension from the spinner. So you'll get the hang of it once you start doing it. The retrieve on the power bait drift rig is actually a lot harder than the spinner. This is my favorite technique, and I've done a lot of work on it to really figure it out. As you can see in the picture here, I have my rod tip super high. Right when you cast, you're gonna want to reel in any of the slack you have in your line and then put your rod tip up like that. This will help keep it right in that strike zone, right on the bottom. You'll kind of feel your split shot bumping along the bottom. Once you get to the end of your drift, you'll start to notice that your bait will come up because you're pulling up like this and the current's pushing it downstream, so it's going to come up. So one thing you could do to keep it down is actually put your rod tip down at the end. And the biggest mistake I see people do when they do this technique is opening the bail and letting their bait just go way downstream. This is really dumb because you're going to lose connection with your bait again. You're not going to feel any bites. You're also going to get snagged, which is super annoying. Why did I spell it like snage? What the You will snage a lot more. Okay, yeah, you're going to snag. You're not going to feel bites. and if people are downstream, you're gonna get caught up in their lines. So it's just never do that. Always just reel up and move yourself downstream so none of that happens. But yeah, this one's kind of harder to get, but once you get the hang of it, it's super fun. The retrieve on the pink worm, it's not very hard. You kind of just, you cast her out there. All you're doing is just kind of jigging your rod a little bit to get that tail to really flutter around and jiggle. There's nothing really to it. I've even had fish bite when I wasn't jigging it, so the worm does most of the action for you. And then the retrieve on the power bait bottom rig, there is no retrieve because you're just bottom fishing. All you're doing is casting out. You don't have to really bomb it out there unless your shoreline's super shallow. Just get it out there. Unless it's fall time, usually where I live in the fall, rainbow trout will come way up close, so you really don't even have to cast it that far in the fall. I suggest you get little rod holders so that you don't have to lean it up against like a little stick or something, but if you have to do the stick technique, there's no problem with that. Another important thing is using bells, because you don't want to be sitting around looking like this the entire day. You just want to be able to hear the bell go off and then a bite. From what I've experienced, the fish just come to you with this rig. Usually in like ponds and lakes, the fish are just kind of cruising around and they'll see your power bait. It's bright stuff, so you just gotta wait. And if you're really not feeling the spot, just move. So now we get into the fun part, which is the bite. So on the spinner, you actually don't want to do a big hook set. Trout aren't actually eating the bait like to eat it. They're kind of just swiping at it like that. Usually they won't get hooked very well. So doing a huge hook set may actually take those hooks out, because most of the time, sometimes there's only like one treble hook right in their mouth. So you could just end up ripping that treble hook out if you do a huge hook set. So just do a little baby hook set, or you don't even have to do one, honestly. So the bite on the power bait drift rig is probably my favorite bite. I personally do a massive hook set, and that's the reason why I like it so much. You'll kind of feel the tapping of the trout. Once you feel that, let them eat it for a second, and then what you want to do is just, you want to always reel down to a fish when you're gonna hook set. Use the weight of the fish to get some load into the rod, and then just set the hook like that. Most of the times the trout's gonna swallow the bait, so you don't have to actually worry about, you know, ripping hooks out of their mouths. This is also really good for meat fishing. If you're trying to keep fish, definitely use this, because they're always, no, not always, they're gonna swallow it like probably half the time. Some guys don't like this because they think it's like, I don't know, they think it's I was gonna say corny. Corn is a whole different problem. It's not a problem. I don't care about it, but some guys get all like fussy about it, about different baits and stuff. Use whatever the heck you want and catch some damn fish, dude. The bite with the power bait bottom rig is also another favorite of mine. You're gonna do another massive hook set on this one. You'll again feel, or you'll hear or see the tapping of the bite from the trout, and then always give them a second, reel in any slack, and just set the hook on them again. And if you have bells on the tip of your rods, just leave them on there. I found with the time it takes to actually take the bells off, you may actually end up losing the fish. So it's not worth it. Just leave them on there, and everyone will also know that you got a fish on because they'll hear the bells going. This is another super fun way of doing it. The bite on the pink worm, it's pretty normal. The fish is usually gonna eat the pink worm, but they're not actually gonna swallow it. So you got a pretty good chance at hooking up. Just do a normal hook set like you would any other fish, and you should hook up into a lot of them. So drag is a very important factor when fighting a fish. For trout, I tend to keep my drag a lot lower because you don't want to overpower them. Like I said before, you could rip their mouths. Keeping the drag a little bit lower is going to help you keep them pinned and have constant tension on them, especially when they thrash and jump. So after you catch a few fish, you'll realize what drag settings work best for you. And keeping a lower drag is also just more fun. The fish gets to run. You get to hear that satisfying sound of the drag peeling. So landing the fish, you should definitely be using a net. But again, if you don't, just wet your hands and grab the fish. Don't squeeze them too much either. You definitely don't want to drag them onto land like this unless you're keeping them, which in this picture, I was keeping this guy. So always respect the fish. Use pliers to take hooks out too, because if you're using trebles, you don't want to have a thrashing trout in your hands and then get those trebles in your fingers. So just be smart. Sometimes handling trout, things go wrong. Stuff happens, man. I've had plenty of people bash me for handling trout wrong in my videos. It happens, dude. And at the end of the day, most of these guys are gonna die anyways. So it is what it is. If it's a wild fish, completely different story. Try your best to take care of them. And that's pretty much it. We've covered literally everything I know about trout fishing. I could have gone over weather, but I personally don't care about weather. I go out no matter what. If it's raining, go out. The fish are already wet anyways, so That's something my grandma said. She asked me if I was going fishing. She's like, oh, I don't blame you. The fish are already wet. So they're stock trout, guys, so they have no idea what weather conditions, how they affect them. If it's wild trout, that could be a different story, but I don't really target wild trout that much. So you should be fully geared up, rigged, and informed. And there's no reason why you can't just go out today and catch one, unless this is the one excuse you get. If your river looks like chocolate milk and is 3 feet high, you probably don't want to go trout fishing. Now, there probably is a way to catch trout in these conditions, but I just haven't figured it out yet. It's incredibly difficult. I tried yesterday. It just wasn't happening. There's always going to be hungry fish around. Just be a hungrier fisherman. But yeah, that's it. Now go catch some fish. See ya.